Hello everybody, today it will be my fifth lecture series. As I've already mentioned in my Facebook as well as in my YouTube handle and my LinkedIn profile that today I'll be dedicating my session to all the legal fraternity as well as to all the members of the legal profession, including the students who are studying law at the undergraduate level and at the postgraduate level, that is at the BA, LLB or LLM. Now, today's topic is very important for them and for me also at the same time, because being a law graduate as well as a postgraduate in law, we have studied about the jurisprudence. Today, our discussion will be on the jurisprudence, and I have also mentioned on my Facebook that why the word jurisprudence is always known as the foundation of law or the sources of law or the philosophy of law. So this is very important to understand that what is jurisprudence. Juris means law and prudence means a skill. So it is the combination of the word of the jurisprudence. Jurisprudence is also known as the theory of law or the philosophy of law, and it is the examination of the general perspective of what law is and what it ought to be. This is a very important point. We need to know that what law is and what it ought to be. It means that what the law will offer in the form of jurisprudence and where the law will take us from there by taking the theories of the jurisprudence as the philosophical aspect of law. Now, actually, jurisprudence investigates such issues where there is a definition of law is involved. There is a legal validity of law. There is a legal norms and the values and the relationship between the law and other fields of study, such as economics, like ethics, like history, like sociology, like political philosophy, and the psychology. Psychology is very important for it is a very important part of jurisprudence also nowadays, because we all know that while studying our undergraduate law or the postgraduate law, in the area of criminal law or the criminology, the criminal psychology plays a very important role. So before going into the criminal psychology aspect, understanding the psychology at the basic level will always help us in order to see that what kind of the jurisprudence aspect of understanding the criminal psychology. Now, what is the modern jurisprudence talks about? Because modern jurisprudence began somewhere in the 18th century and was based on the first principles of natural law, civil law, and law of nations. Contemporary philosophy of law addresses problems internal to law and the legal systems and the problem of law as a social institution that relates to the larger political and social context in which it exists. Jurisprudence can be divided into categories both by the question the scholars seeks to answer and also by the theories of jurisprudence or school of thought regarding how those questions are best answered. Because natural law gives us an area of a rational objective which limits the power of the rulers, and the foundation of law are essential through the reason. And it is from this law that these human laws gain force. Another main important area in order to understand is the analytical jurisprudence. Analytical jurisprudence attempt to describe what law is, because the two historically dominant theories in analytical jurisprudence is a legal the positivism and natural law theory. Because according to legal the positivist, what law is and what law ought to be have no necessary connection to one another. Why it is such so? Why there is no necessary connection between these two things, what the law is and what it ought to be? Because it's theoretically possible to engage in analytical jurisprudence without simultaneously engaging in any kind of normative jurisprudence. Because according to natural law theorists, there is always a necessary connection between the law is and what it ought to be. So it is very impossible to engage in any kind of analytic jurisprudence without simultaneously engaging in normative jurisprudence. So, what is normative jurisprudence? Normative jurisprudence attempt to prescribe what the law ought to be. We have understood what the law ought to be or where the law will go. So, the normative jurisprudence actually describes what the law ought to be, because it is concerned with the goal or the purpose. For example, if any legislature or the parliament is making any law, it is obviously understanding the understanding of the parliament and or the legislature is that what will be the goal and the objective of the law. If the legislature or parliament is making any changes in BNS or BNSS or BSA, we all know earlier it was called IPC, CRPC and evidence. So if they, what is the objective of changing the nomenclature of these laws? There must be a particular objective or the policy which are involved in order to make the law simplified for the people to understand, as well as not only the people, the general citizen and the masses, but also how the jurist is going to interpret along with the advocates or the students that they're going to study and the research scholars who are engaged in understanding the basic foundation of law, that is the jurisprudence. Because social jurisprudence is a kind of an area which studies the nature and the function of law in the light of social scientific knowledge. Without society, we cannot have any law, and without law, the society cannot run. So they are interrelated and they are interconnected with each other. So many scholars, many theorists have always believed that societal jurisprudence plays a very important role in the variations of the legal phenomena between the different cultures and society. For example, if you have any international law which is governing, for international trade law. International trade law means that the international trade law has to be governed throughout the globe. If there is any dispute between the countries or the nations in terms of international trade, then the international trade law will comes into picture. So not only within the domestic territory of the country, but also the prevalence of the theories of law between the countries, between the regions, between the various sectors has also to be determined. Very important to know that the term philosophy of law or the jurisprudence is concerned are often used interchangeably through jurisprudence sometimes, and encompasses the forms of reasoning that fit into the economics or the sociology. Why economics? Why sociology? Why we need to study ethics in our legal education? Why advocate has to learn the art of ethics in court practice, outside the court practice? Why they have to know about the economics of law? What are the sociological aspect of law? These are the foundations where you will start to know about the jurisprudence. Jurisprudence will be a guiding force in order to take you there. Because whereas the lawyers are interested in what law is on a specific issue, in a specific jurisdiction, analytical philosophers of law are interested in identifying the features of law which is to be shared across the cultures, times and places. Taken together, these foundational features of law offer a kind of a universal definition of philosophies are after. The general approach allows the philosopher to ask the question, and for example, that what separates law from the morality, from politics, from practical reason. So till now in our discussion, we have identified that where the law can go, it can go into the morality, it can go into the politics, it can go into the society, it go into the ethics, it go into the economics, it can go into the psychology. This is the law ought to be. This is the law ought to be made for it. And this is the jurisprudence. This is the basic foundation and the philosophy and the source of law. Because the field which are traditionally focused on giving an account of law's nature, some scholars have begun to examine the nature of domains within the law. For example, tort law. For example, the contract law. For example, the criminal law. For example, the civil law. For example, the industrial law. For example, the commercial law. So there are various aspects across the times and places. And what is the basis? What the law ought to be, and what the law is, and that is the jurisprudence. That is the theorists have always stressed, that how we are going to deal with the varieties of law across the domain, across the theories from one to another. A particular area of research has been the distinction between the tort law and the criminal law. There is intermingling of the international trade law with the international law. There is an intermingling of the law of nations with the criminological factors of law. So this is the area where the jurisprudence actually bears. And very important to understand in order to the etymology or the terminology of the jurisprudence, which actually says that juris means the law, the genitive form of the law, and the prudence, it means the discretion of the foresight where the law ought to be go. This is the word jurisprudence actually is a French word. Now it has been adopted in the English language word, and we all know what the jurisprudence is. But nevertheless, if you want to end this session, we have to always understand and remember the ancient Indian scriptures, Dharma Shastra. Dharma Shastra text of the India, or the Dharma Sutras are the examples where the law has began its journey. But in the modern century, we have changed it to jurisprudence. But it is in the Indian scripture, in the Chinese scripture, it was there, the basics of law, Dharma Sutra. So I end by saying that the Dharma is the law and the law is the jurisprudence, and where the law is and where we ought to be. Thank you very much for joining us.